Hello and welcome to this edition of Big Fish Small Pod for Thursday, May 16th, 2024. And if you are new to the Small Pod, here we like to give you all the information about the Marlins for that particular day, all season long, in 10 minutes or less. And as always, Big Fish Small Pod is presented by MPT College Consulting. You can check them out at mptcollegeconsulting.com. And Marlins fans, in this episode of Big Fish Small Pod, we will be recapping a bit of the series between the Miami Marlins and the Detroit Tigers, where the Marlins took back-to-back games, very low-scoring games, but in both cases, very great pitching performances. We'll look at yesterday's game where Trevor Rogers had easily his best start of the season to go along and beat the Detroit Tigers 2-0. And then we'll also look at, again, winning these two great games are great, but again, with this, you also have to look at what's the potential in terms of trading players. Marlins have already traded Luis Arias. There's articles coming out. John Heyman recently put out something talking about the Marlins' potential in trading Jesus Luzardo, Jazz Chisholm, Tanner Scott, something recently on MLB.com where they talked to different front office people around the league, and two execs mentioned that potential trade targets around the league are Jesus Luzardo and Jazz Chisholm. But let's go ahead and talk about a little bit of the game between the Marlins and the Detroit Tigers. 2-0 ball game. Trevor Rogers got the start. Five innings of work for Trevor Rogers on this game. But it was very good. He only allowed 3 hits, no earned runs, only 2 walks, but again, 6 strikeouts, the most strikeouts he's had since April 17th against the San Francisco Giants. But very great start for Trevor Rogers in the way that he's performed, seeing him as of late. This is a guy that it seemed like it just almost a shell of that 2021 self. But what he did this game against Detroit, maybe this is just a turning point of him trying to at least reach back to the heights that we did see all those years ago. And for this game, for Trevor Rogers, in terms of what he did in that amount of work, he only pitched only 83 pitches again, doing that in 5 innings. That really just equals out to about maybe 15, 16 pitches an inning. But overall, again, what you're seeing with the Marlins, they can always, something turns around with them offensively, or maybe it's the defense that something happens, and maybe the pitching where they give up a hit and it turns out to be a home run and everything like that. But what we got from Trevor Rogers, I thought was very good, striking out 6 guys. The walks, again, 2, you take that, of course, with Trevor Rogers. Everything looked good. His pitches looked very well in this game against the Detroit Tigers. And I was very impressed with the way he performed. I think if he continue this, it could be a turnaround season for Trevor Rogers. Maybe this is the point that in terms of him trying to change it up. He mentioned he wanted to go into that 6th inning, but again, little injury history there. Maybe they felt comfortable with they had in the bullpen that they didn't want to have Trevor Rogers potentially get up to close to 100 innings and only in the 6th inning. Something I could very understand there with Trevor Rogers. But for the Marlins, back-to-back wins, back-to-back shutouts, just incredible. There was a previous small pod and what Ryan Weathers put out and how great he was. Easily one of the best starts this entire season for the Marlins. Maybe the best start of the season for any Marlins pitcher. But to also go ahead and talk about what also happened, I think another player that needs to be mentioned is Brian De La Cruz. Brian De La Cruz had his 9th home run of the season. And I mentioned potential trade targets. I think the number one guy to potentially talk about here would have to be Brian De La Cruz and how he's been this entirety of the season. Just overall, it seems like just incredible in terms of what Brian De La Cruz has done. Just looking at some of the stats here, you're looking at it on the screen for this season: 9 home runs, 24 RBIs, 256 average, OPS 760, the highest for any Marlins player this season. Obviously not named Luis Arias, but currently on the roster with Brian De La Cruz. And this is the guy that potentially get traded. I don't want to see him get traded. I don't like to see when anyone gets traded. But if you have to talk about players potentially getting traded, we've met lots of talk to Luzardo, Jazz, Tanner Scott. I think a guy that needs to be mentioned is Brian De La Cruz and just how well he's played so far this season. Again, very young. He could give you those home runs. Again, the number one thing with Brian De La Cruz is, can he be consistent? Is this a guy that could potentially do it through the entirety of the season and not just give you spurts and little outings here and there? Again, we've seen that a lot with Brian De La Cruz in his major league career with the Marlins. Just it seems like 1 month he'll be great, then he'll have a 2-week stretch where he's probably one of the worst hitters in baseball, or at least in the Marlins, and then he'll come back, be one of the best hitters in baseball, and then kind of spike and come back up and down. But Brian De La Cruz did have a solid year last season. Again, his entirety of his career, he's had at least a 715 OPS, slugging at least 411. Just something to really look at in terms of Brian De La Cruz OPS plus of 110 this season, close to almost a 1 more. But with Brian De La Cruz, it's just very streaky player. But if the Marlins can get something out of him, I think now might be the time where he's at his hottest. This might be the peak of Brian De La Cruz. Already 9 home runs already into this part of the season. This is a guy, especially looking at this year, could definitely get up to 20 home runs, 25 home runs if he continues to push what he's continuing to do. But overall, I think Brian De La Cruz is a sneaky player in terms of maybe the Marlins could trade and see what Marlins can get from him. He's not a free agent until 2028, arbitration eligible in 2025. So a couple more years of control for any team that could potentially need Brian De La Cruz. But maybe in terms of him, again, we're maybe a little worried about his streakiness and what he could potentially do for a team. They don't want to have that much in terms of hot streaks and cool streaks and whatnot. But with Brian De La Cruz and just overall how he's been the last 7 days, again, a part of that streakiness, only hitting 208, 644 OPS. But again, overall, when you look at what he's done the entirety of the season, this is maybe someone that some teams could potentially want, or maybe they might see again that streakiness and think, oh, I don't know if I want this player on my team. But overall, just really great in terms of what the Marlins have been doing for the team and for everything that's just been needed for them. It's just really incredible what everything that has to be done for them and what they've done so far, at least the last 2 games against Detroit, and potentially what they can do the rest of the way. But again, they're going to have to trade players. Brian De La Cruz, I think, is a sneaky option for them. They might get some pretty good return for Brian De La Cruz. But overall, 2 shutouts for the Marlins against the Detroit Tigers. Incredible. 2 fantastic pitching performances. Hitting, not the best in terms of there. Really was just primarily that Brian De La Cruz home run that really got those 2 runs for the Marlins. But overall, the hitting has not been the best, but the pitching is getting the job done, which we'll see what happens. It's only May 16th. We'll see how the team looks June 16th, July 16th. But as of right now, I am Danny Rodriguez. This is Big Fish, Small Pod, presented by MPT College Consulting. And as always, go fish.